I remember the first time I typed the words that would erase a world. It was a Tuesday morning, or what passed for morning on Coruscant, where the sky never changed, and the light was always artificial, filtered through layers of atmospheric scrubbers, and traffic lanes so thick, they blotted out the sun. I sat in my cubicle on the 73rd floor of the Imperial Information Ministry, Subsector Communications Division, watching the pale blue glow of my datapad illuminate my hands. They looked clean. They always looked clean. Now, the assignment had come through at 600 hours, flagged priority 3, which meant it needed to be completed before the day cycle ended, but wasn't urgent enough to interrupt my breakfast. I ate alone in the commissary that morning, a protein bar and reconstituted cafe, both tasting faintly of recycled air and metal, while around me, hundreds of other officers did the same. We didn't speak much. There was nothing to say. We all knew what our work was. We all believed it was necessary. The brief was simple. Draft a public statement regarding the industrial accident on Gorman. Emphasize Imperial sympathy. Minimize casualty figures. Redirect focus to ongoing infrastructure improvements. Standard template, standard language, standard truth. I wrote it in 20 minutes. The words flowed easily because I'd written them 1,000 times before, in 1,000 different configurations. The Empire regrets to confirm that a landing platform collapse in Gorman's Central District has resulted in casualties. His Imperial Majesty extends his deepest sympathies to affected families. Investigation is ongoing. Imperial engineers are already en route to ensure such tragedies are prevented in the future. Order and safety remain our highest priorities. Now, I filed the statement. Not so new mistake. It was approved within the hour. By midday, it was broadcasting across every holonet node in the CERN sector. By evening, the real story, that an Imperial Star Destroyer had landed on a crowd of peaceful protesters, crushing 300 beings beneath its landing struts, had been buried beneath 50 other stories I'd also written. A shipping efficiency report from Kuwait, a feel-good piece about stormtrooper academies on Karita, a cultural feature on the Emperor's art collection. The truth became a rumor. The rumor became a lie. And I went home, took a shower, and slept 8 hours without dreaming. That was 15 years ago. I can still taste that protein bar. I can still see the blue glow of the screen. Now, I can still feel the smooth keys beneath my fingers, the tiny click each one made as I pressed it. The mechanical certainty of letters forming into sentences, sentences forming into reality. That sound done, the clicking it's followed me through every assignment since. Even now, in the silence, I hear it. Click, dot, mini. Click, dot, click, dot. The sound of worlds ending, one keystroke at a time. My name doesn't matter. I'm not important. That's the point. I was never supposed to be important. I was a cog, a processor, a voice that spoke without speaking, invisible and essential, in the way all infrastructure is invisible and essential. When people heard Imperial broadcasts, they didn't hear me. They heard the Empire. They heard inevitability. They heard the future, bright and ordered and safe. If only they would comply. I was good at my job. Exceptionally good. That's why they promoted me. I grew up on Brentala 4, a trade hub world where loyalty to the Empire was less a political stance and more a practical necessity. My parents worked in customs. Administration. My father processed shipping manifests. My mother handled tariff disputes, and they raised me to understand that order was prosperity, that chaos was death, that the Emperor had saved the galaxy from tearing itself apart. I believed them. Why wouldn't I? The Clone Wars had ended when I was a child. I remembered the fear, the uncertainty, the way my mother would hold me during air raid drills, whispering that everything would be okay, that the Republic would protect us. And then the Republic became the Empire, and the raids stopped, and everything was okay. I studied communications at the Imperial Academy on Coruscant. I was 17. I'd scored high on the aptitude tests, high enough to avoid military conscription, high enough to qualify for administrative service. The Academy was beautiful, in the way all Imperial architecture is beautiful. Clean lines, white marble, vast atriums filled with light that never seemed to come from anywhere in particular. We wore gray uniforms. We stood in neat rows. We learned the principles of effective messaging: clarity, repetition, emotional resonance, plausible deniability. My instructors praised my writing. They said I had a gift for making difficult truths palatable. They said I understood the psychology of reassurance. They said I would go far. They were right. I graduated top of my class. I was assigned to the ministry at 21. For the first 3 years, I worked in agricultural propaganda, drafting reports on harvest yields, imperial food distribution programs, the success of mechanized farming initiatives on newly absorbed worlds. It was boring work, but I believed in it. The Empire was feeding billions. That mattered. The fact that we sometimes exaggerated the numbers, or omitted the details about forced labor camps on Ryloth, or failed to mention the famines on worlds that refused to comply with collectivization order SOD, these were minor edits, necessary simplifications. The public didn't need every detail. They needed to trust that someone was managing the complexity. They needed to feel safe. I was transferred to sector communications when I was 24. My supervisor, a thin, gray woman named Pelis Oven, who always smelled faintly of Bacta and never smiled, called me into her office and told me I was being reassigned to crisis response. I remember the way she said it, without emphasis, as if it were no different from being assigned to shipping reports. She handed me a datapad with my new clearance codes and told me I would be working with sensitive material. I didn't understand what that meant until my first day. The office was smaller than I expected. 6 desks, 5 other officers, all of them older than me, all of them silent. The walls were soundproofed. There were no windows. The only light came from the overhead panels and the glow of our screens. We didn't have names, only designation codes. Mine was I-7, 1743. I never learned the real names of my colleagues. We never spoke, except about work. Our job was to respond to incidents. An incident could be anything: a protest, a riot, a terrorist attack, a military action, a famine, a plague, a factory collapse, a mass execution, anything that might generate negative press, anything that might make people question imperial authority, anything that might suggest the galaxy was not, in fact, safe and orderly and prosperous under the Emperor's rule. We received the raw reports, unfiltered intelligence from ESB, military summaries, sector governor briefs, and we turned them into stories. Not lies exactly. We were told never to lie outright. Lies could be disproven. Lies created martyrs. Instead, we edited. We contextualized. We reframed. We took a massacre and made it a security operation. We took a famine and made it a temporary supply chain disruption. We took a rebellion and made it a criminal conspiracy funded by foreign agitators. We made the truth irrelevant. I wrote my first crisis response 3 days into the assignment. A mining colony on Fest had refused to meet its quotas. The local garrison had responded with orbital bombardment, destroying 3 HAB complexes and killing an estimated 2,000 workers. My job was to draft the official statement. I stared at the screen for 10 minutes before I started typing. Imperial forces successfully neutralized a separatist cell operating within the Fest mining district. The insurgents, believed to be remnants of the Confederate remnant, had sabotaged critical infrastructure and were using civilian populations as shields. Imperial commanders made every effort to minimize collateral damage. The situation is now under control. Production has resumed. The Emperor commends the swift action of local security forces in protecting the region from further instability. I submitted it. It was approved. It aired within 6 hours. That night, I went home and couldn't eat. I sat in my apartment, small, climate-controlled box, on the 143rd level of a residential tower and stared at the wall. I kept thinking about the word collateral. How clean it sounded. How efficient. 2,000 people reduced to a single adjective. But I didn't quit. I didn't report the discrepancy. No, I didn't question the orders. Because I understood on some level I didn't want to examine too closely that this was the job. This was what order required. Someone had to manage the narrative. Someone had to keep the galaxy from descending into panic. If people knew the full truth of every Imperial action, if they understood the cost of stability, they would revolt. They would destroy themselves. The Clone Wars had proven that. The galaxy needed the Empire, and the Empire needed people like me. So I kept writing. Over the months, the assignments became routine. A labor strike on Corellia, reframed as economic sabotage by Republic sympathizers. A Jedi sighting on Jebima, dismissed as mass hysteria and cult activity. The destruction of an entire city, district on Genocide, classified as a decontamination operation following industrial chemical leak. Each one required a different tone, a different angle. But the core principle was always the same. The Empire acts in the galaxy's best interest, and anyone who suffers in the process was either unfortunate collateral or deserved their fate. I learned to write without feeling. I learned to see the words as abstract symbols, disconnected from the things they described. A death was a casualty. A massacre was a police action. Slavery was involuntary labor conscription. Genocide was population relocation. The language did the work for me. If I never used the real words, I never had to confront the real things. My colleagues operated the same way. We never discussed our assignments outside the office. We never acknowledged what we were doing. There was an unspoken agreement among us that to name Itanto, call it what it was, would make it unbearable. So we didn't. We filed our reports. We met our deadlines. We collected our pay. We went home. We slept. We came back. The office had a smell I'll never forget. Recycled air mixed with ozone from the computer terminals, and underneath that, something faintly chemical, like cleaning solvent or preservative fluid. Every morning when I walked in, that smell hit me, and I felt a strange comfort in it. It meant I was where I was supposed to be. It meant I was useful. After my first year in crisis response, I was promoted to senior communications officer. My clearance level increased. I was given access to intelligence reports before they were redacted, before they were sanitized for broader distribution. I saw things I hadn't seen before. Details, knowledge, numbers, names. No. I saw the after-action report from Kashyyyk, where Imperial forces had burned entire Roshir forests to root out Wookiee resistance cells, killing tens of thousands in the process. I saw the casualty estimates from the Gorman massacre, not 300, but closer to 800, most of them children. I saw the internal memos from Moff Tarkin, discussing the efficiency gains of using slave labor for Death Star construction. I saw surveillance footage of interrogation rooms, of execution chambers, of mass graves on worlds whose names I didn't recognize. And I kept writing. Because what else was I going to do? Report it? To whom? The entire system knew. The Emperor knew. The Moths knew. The SB knew. Powinwayand, Propagandist, Alderaan casualty knew. The military knew. This wasn't a secret. This was policy. This was how the Empire functioned. To oppose it was to oppose order itself. To oppose it was treason. And treason was death. I told myself that I was preventing greater harm. That if I wrote convincingly enough, if I made people believe in the Empire's benevolence, fewer would rebel. Fewer would die. I was saving lives by lying. I was preserving peace by burying the truth. It was a necessary evil. Someone had to do it. Better Mia. Someone who understood the stakes. Someone who could do it wella, than someone incompetent who might botch the job and cause even more chaos. I almost believed it. My supervisor, Owen, called me into her office one afternoon during my 3rd year in crisis response. She looked older than usual, her skin papery and gray, her eyes sunken. She gestured for me to sit. I did. You're being transferred again, she said. I felt a small jolt of panic. Transfers could mean anything or promotion, reassignment, or something worse. Where? I asked. Planetary narrative coordination, she said. You'll be managing full-scale reputational campaigns for individual worlds. High-profile work. Direct oversight from the Imperial Security Bureau. I should have felt pride. This was a significant promotion. But instead, I felt something cold settle in my stomach. What kind of campaigns? I asked. Owen leaned back in her chair. Alderaan, she said. You'll be managing the Alderaan project. I didn't understand. Alderaan is a core world, I said. It's stable. Senator Organa Isa? Senator Organa is a problem, Owen interrupted. He's too popular. I'm too influential. His rhetoric is creating sympathy for rebel elements. We need to undermine his credibility without making him a martyr. That's your job. Me. You'll coordinate with ISB to seed story saw, corruption allegations, ties to criminal syndicates, moral scandals, gradual erosion. Nothing overt. By the time we're done, the galaxy will see Alderaan as a haven for traitors. When the time comes to act, no one will question it. I stared at her. When the time comes to act. She didn't answer. She just handed me a datapad. Wah, your briefing materials. Start tomorrow. I took the datapad. I left her office. I went to the refresher and vomited. But I reported for the assignment the next day. The Alderaan project consumed 2 years of my life. I didn't work alone. There were entire teams dedicated to different aspects of the campaign. But I was responsible for the overarching narrative. I wrote op-eds under false billings, published in holonet outlets across the core. I fabricated financial records showing that Organa had accepted bribes from separatist remnants. I created falsified intelligence reports linking Alderaanian charity organizations to rebel funding networks. I coordinated with ESB SEOPS teams to plant evidence, stage incidents, manufacture scandals. We were careful. We were patient. We never pushed too hard, never made it too obvious. The lies spread slowly, like rot through a foundation. Public opinion shifted incrementally. Alderaan's reputation, synonymous with culture, diplomacy, and peace, became tainted, suspicious. By the end of the 2nd year, when I saw polls showing that a majority of core world citizens believed Alderaan was sympathetic to anti-imperial elements, I felt a strange, nauseating pride. I had done my job well. I never thought about what when the time comes to act meant. No, I didn't let myself think about it. Then, Alderaan was destroyed. I wasn't informed in advance. No one in my division was. We learned about it the same way the rest of the galaxy did. A brief, clinical announcement on the holonet. Imperial forces have neutralized a rebel installation on Alderaan. The operation was successful. There were no Imperial casualties. I was at my desk when I read it. I remember the exact phrase, neutralized a rebel installation. I remember thinking, that's not how you phrase a planetary bombardment. That's not the language we use for a. And then, I understood. They hadn't bombed a city. They hadn't destroyed a military base. They had destroyed the entire planet. 2 billion people. Gone. I sat very still. Around me, other officers were working, typing, filing reports. No one reacted. No one said anything. The hum of the computers continued. The recycled air continued to circulate. The lights continued to shine. I opened my message queue. There was already an assignment waiting for me. Flagged Priority 1. Draft comprehensive media strategy to manage public response to Alderaan operation. Emphasize rebel base threat. Minimize casualty discussion. Frame as necessary action to prevent greater loss of life. Talking points attached. Deadline. 1800 hours. I stared at the message. My hands were shaking. I opened the talking points document. It was 12 pages long, written by someone else in the Ministria, someone whose designation code I didn't recognize. It outlined the strategy in detail. Alderaan was a rebel stronghold. The planet's government had been infiltrated by terrorists. Imperial intelligence had confirmed the presence of superweapon facilities. The Death Star had acted in self-defense, preemptively stopping a catastrophic attack. The people of Alderaan were tragic casualties of rebel extremism. Their deaths were regrettable but necessary. The Emperor mourned their loss. It was elegant. It was comprehensive. It was a lie so enormous, so audacious, that part of me couldn't help but admire the craft of it. And then I started typing. I wrote for 6 hours straight. I produced a 30-page media guidebook, sample scripts for holonet anchors, press release templates for sector governors, interview talking points for military spokespeople, social media response protocols. I anticipated every question, every objection, every angle of attack. I crafted language that would make the unthinkable seem reasonable. I made the destruction of a planet sound like a tragic but understandable response to an imminent threat. I submitted it at 1750 hours. It was approved immediately. By the next morning, my language was everywhere I am, broadcast on every Imperial channel, repeated by every official spokesperson, echoed by every loyal commentator. Within a week, the dominant narrative across the core worlds was that Alderaan had been a nest of traitors, that the Emperor had acted with regret but resolve, that the rebellion was responsible for those deaths. And people believed it. Not everyone, but enough. Enough to prevent mass revolt. Enough to maintain order. I went home that night and sat in the dark. I didn't eat. I didn't sleep. I just sat there, staring at nothing, while the city hummed around me, millions of beings living their lives, unaware or indifferent to the fact that an entire world had been erased, that 2 billion voices had been silenced, that I had helped make it acceptable. At some point, I started laughing. I don't know why. It wasn't funny, but I laughed until I couldn't breathe, and then I stopped, and then I was just sitting there again in the dark, silent. I thought about quitting. I thought about it seriously for the first time. I could resign. I'd claim health issues. Request a transfer to some minor administrative post on a backwater world, disappear into the vast bureaucracy of the Empire, and spend the rest of my life processing shipping manifests or tax reports. Something meaningless. Something that didn't kill people. But I didn't, because I knew that if I quit, someone else would take my place. Someone less skilled, less careful, less effective. And that person might make mistakes. They might write something clumsy, something that failed to convince, something that caused more unrest, more violence, more death. At least I was good at this. At least when I did it, it worked. That's what I told myself. The truth, which I couldn't quite admit, was that I was afraid. Quitting would mean acknowledging what I'd done. It would mean facing the enormity of it. It would mean admitting that I was complicit, that I was responsible, that I had blood on my hands, oceans of it, worlds of it. As long as I kept working, I could pretend I was just following orders, just doing my job, just one small cog in a vast machine. I could pretend I didn't have a choice. So I kept writing. After Alderaan, the assignments changed. Or maybe I changed. I stopped seeing them as abstract problems to solve, and started seeing them as wounds I was cauterizing. The Empire was bleeding, losing credibility, losing control, losing the war against the rebellion. And my job was to stop the bleeding, to make people believe that everything was fine, that the Empire was still strong, still just, still inevitable. I wrote the press releases after Hoth. Rebel terrorists routed from Hidden Fortress. Imperial victory complete. I didn't mention that the rebels had escaped. I didn't mention that the operation had cost billions of credits and achieved nothing strategic. I made it sound like a triumph. I wrote the reports after Endor. That one was harder. The Emperor was dead. The Death Star was destroyed. Half the Imperial fleet was gone. For 3 days there was chaos in the Ministry. No clear chain of command, no unified messaging, conflicting reports from different sectors. I was locked in my office for 18 hours straight, drafting and redrafting the official narrative. Eventually we settled on this. The Emperor has been martyred by rebel assassins. His sacrifice will not be in vain. The Empire endures. Order will be restored. It was a lie. The Empire was fracturing. Moths were declaring themselves warlords. Entire sectors were seceding. The rebellion was surging, but we couldn't say that. We had to maintain the illusion of control. Because the moment we admitted the truth, the moment we acknowledged that the Empire was dying, it would collapse completely. So I kept writing, and the lies got bigger, and the truth became something I only encountered in classified reports that I immediately buried under new narratives, new scripts, new acceptable realities. I was promoted again. Senior Director of Strategic Communications. I had my own office, Noah, real one, with a window that looked out over Coruscant's endless cityscape. I had a team of 20 officers working under me. I attended briefings with ISB directors and MOFs. I was important, and I was empty. I remember standing at that window one evening, watching the traffic lanes blur past, thousands of ships moving through the twilight like blood cells through arteries, and I thought, I wonder if any of them know. I wonder if any of those pilots, those passengers, those beings going about their lives, understand that everything they believe about the galaxy is a story I helped write. Probably not. That was the point. The best propaganda is invisible. It doesn't feel like propaganda. It feels like truth. I had become so good at my job that I could no longer tell the difference. The years after Endor were the hardest. The Empire was dying, but it was dying slowly, messily, thrashing and fragmenting and refusing to let go. I wrote statements for a dozen different Imperial remnants, each claiming to be the legitimate continuation of Palpatine's vision. I wrote recruitment materials for MOFs who controlled single sectors, sometimes single planets. I wrote desperate, grandiose proclamations of strength for an empire that no longer existed. And then I wrote for the First Order. I don't know when exactly the transition happened. One day I was working for the Imperial Remnant in the Corps. The next I was receiving assignments from someone in the unknown Rejanza, someone who never gave their name, only a designation code. The tone of the work shifted. It became more ideological, more fanatical. We weren't preserving order anymore. We were preparing for rebirth. For revenge. I wrote the manifestos. I wrote the recruitment propaganda. I wrote the justifications for stricter measures, harsher punishments, total control. I wrote about the weakness of the New Republic, the chaos it had unleashed, the necessity of returning to imperial discipline. I made the First Order sound inevitable. And then one day, I stopped. I can't say exactly why. It wasn't a moral awakening. It wasn't a sudden realization of guilt. It was just exhaustion. I was in my office, staring at a briefing about a civilian massacre on some outer rim world I'd never heard of. And I was supposed to write a statement explaining why it was necessary, why it was just, why it was the fault of the victims for resisting. And I just couldn't. I couldn't make my fingers move. I couldn't find the words. For the first time in 23 years, I couldn't write the lie. I sat there for hours. My terminal blinked, waiting for input. Outside, the city hummed. Inside, I was silent. Eventually, my supervisor, a young officer I didn't know, someone who'd joined the First Order after the Empire fell, came to check on me. I see 7,743, he said. Your report is overdue. I looked at him. He was maybe 25, bright-eyed, no-way, eager, undergo. He believed, truly believed, in the First Order, in the righteousness of the cause, in the necessity of what we were doing. I had been him once. Knowing too. I can't do it, I said. He frowned. You? What? I can't write it, I said. I can't, I stopped. I didn't know how to explain. I didn't have the words. He stared at me for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. You're burned out, he said. It happens. Take a few days, medical leave. We'll reassign the project. I wanted to tell him that it wasn't burnout, that it was something else, something worse. But I didn't. I just nodded. Oh, I took the medical leave. I never went back. I don't know what happened to my position. I assume someone else took over. Someone younger. Someone who still believed, or someone who, like me, had learned not to think about it too hard. I disappeared. It wasn't difficult. The First Order was enormous and chaotic, and people disappeared all the time as deserters, defectors, casualties of the war. I changed my name. I found work on a backwater mining colony doing data entry for shipping logistics. Meaningless work. Kamshuru wado adimis work. Safe work. May masud? But I couldn't escape what I'd done. I dream about Alderaan sometimes. Not the planet as it was, but as I imagine it in its final moments. I dream about a child looking up at the sky and seeing the Death Star moon that isn't a moon and not understanding. I dream about parents holding their children, politicians in the Senate chambers, artists in their studios, all of them going about their lives right up until the moment the laser fires, and then nothing. 2 billion people, gone in an instant, and the galaxy shrugged. Because I had made it acceptable. I had made it explicable. I had given the Empire's supporters the language they needed to justify it, and I had given the Empire's opponents so much other atrocity to focus on that Alderaan became just one more name in a list too long to comprehend. I erased them twice. Once when the planet died. No, I was inside. And once when I wrote the story that made their deaths meaningless. I think about all the other worlds I wrote about. Gorman, Do, Dai, Atiu, Sordrai, Kashyyyk, Geonosis, Dentuar, D, Ein, Capture-B, Warnawanawide, Rebmass-Capper, Eons, Fest, Dai. Dozens more. Hundreds maybe. Each one, a collection of lives I reduced to abstractions. Casualties. Collateral. Dotteral. Necessary sacrifices. Each one a wound I covered with words until the bleeding stopped. Until people forgot it had bled at all. I used to think I was a victim of the system. That I was trapped. That I had no choice. That I was just doing what I had to do to survive. But that's a lie too. The last one I told myself. I had choices. Giveaway choices. I made them. Every time I sat down at that terminal and typed the words, I chose to do it. I could have refused. Lied. I could have resigned. I could have sabotaged the reports, leaked the truth, done anything other than what I did. But I didn't. Because refusing would have been dangerous. Because resigning would have been admitting guilt. Because sabotage would have been treason. And because on some level I still can't fully face, I believed. Not in the Empire's righteousness, not in its benevolence, but in its necessity. I believed that order required this. That civilization required this. That someone had to do the ugly work of managing the narrative, and it might as well be me. I believed my lies. That's the worst part. I too dear, I bear. Somewhere along the way, I stopped seeing them as lies at all. They became the truth. The only truth that mattered. Because if enough people believe something, if it becomes the dominant narrative, the accepted reality, then what difference does the underlying fact make? Truth is what people believe, and I controlled what they believed. I was powerful, more powerful than any soldier, any pilot, any bureaucrat. I didn't carry a blaster. No, I didn't command troops. I didn't govern planets. But I shaped reality. I decided what was real and what wasn't. I decided what mattered and what could be forgotten. I decided who lived to know, in body, but in memoria, and who vanished without a trace. That power felt like purpose. It felt like meaning. It felt like I was important, that I was contributing to something larger than myself. But I was just a killer. A different kind of killer, one who never saw the bodies, but a killer nonetheless. The Empire is gone now. The First Order is crumbling. The galaxy is rebuilding, slowly. Under the New Republic, people are trying to move forward. They're writing new histories, new narratives. They're trying to make sense of what happened, how it happened, why it happened. And my worka, me wordsa, are part of that history. They're archived somewhere, indexed and cataloged in some New Republic database. Researchers study them. Historians analyze them. They use them as primary sources to understand the Empire's propaganda apparatus. They don't know my name. They don't know it was me. They see the designation Codex 7017-43, and they see a faceless functionary, one of thousands who kept the machine running. They don't know that I stayed up, nights perfecting the language. They don't know that I took pride in my work. You was shooing day too? They don't know that I believed, truly believed, that I was serving a necessary function. They don't know that I'm still here, living under a false name on a world whose name doesn't matter, working a job that doesn't matter, waiting to die. I think about confessing sometimes. turning myself in. New rise. Testifying before some war crimes tribunal. Neoshimi. Admitting what I did, accepting punishment, seeking some kind of atonement. But what would that accomplish? The damage is done. The words are written. The planets are destroyed. The billions are dead. My confession wouldn't bring them back. Oh, it wouldn't undo the years of lies. It wouldn't restore the truth. And the truth is this: I'm not special. I'm not uniquely evil. I'm just someone who was good at writing, who was offered a job, who took it, who did it well. There were thousands of people like me in the Empire. Tens of thousands. All of us writing, editing, shaping, controlling. All of us telling ourselves we had no choice, that someone had to do it, that it was necessary. We were the Empire, not the Emperor, not the Moffs, not the Stormtroopers. Us, the ones who made it sound reasonable. And we were very, very good at our jobs. I still hear the clicking sometimes. The sound of the keys. Late at night, when the mining colony is quiet and I'm lying in my bunk, I hear it. Click, dot, click, die, click, dot. The sound of letters forming into words, words forming into sentences, sentences forming into a reality that erased worlds. The sound of my hands, clean and efficient, typing death. I wonder if the others hear it too. My former colleagues. The ones who survived, who disappeared, who found new lives. I wonder if they dream about Alderaan. I wonder if they think about what we did. Or maybe they don't. Maybe I'm the only one haunted. Maybe the others found a way to rationalize it, to file it away, to move on. Maybe they tell themselves it wasn't their fault, that they were just doing their jobs, that history will absolve them. Maybe they're right. No, but I don't think so. There's a phrase I remember from my training at the academy. One of my instructors said it during a lecture on crisis communications. Truth, he said, is treason in an empire built on lies. At the time, I thought he was warning us, teaching us to be vigilant against subversive elements, against those who would undermine imperial stability with inconvenient facts. Now I understand what he really meant. The truth was treason, because the empire couldn't survive truth. It required vast, intricate, all-encompassing lies. It required people like me to write them, to maintain them, to make them more real than reality. And I was loyal. I was loyal. I was so loyal. I never committed treason. I never told the truth. I wish I had. I wish I had written, just once, what actually happened. I wish I had titled a report, 2 billion people murdered on Alderaan for political expediency. I wish I had sent it out on every holonet channel. I wish I had made it impossible to ignore, impossible to spin, impossible to bury. I wish I had committed treason. But I didn't. And now, all I have is this confession that no one will hear, a truth that comes too late, spoken by a ghost in a galaxy that's already moved on. I worked for the Empire for 23 years. I helped it kill. I helped it lie. I helped it survive far longer than it should have. And the worst part, the part I can't escape, the part that wakes me in the night, is that I was good at it. I was very, very good at it. There's a shuttle port near the mining colony where I live now. Small. Barely used. Maybe a dozen ships a week. I go there sometimes and watch them launch teeny sparks lifting into the sky, carrying people to other worlds, other lives. I watch them until they disappear into the black, and I think about all the ships that launched from Alderaan that last day. The ones that made it off before the planet died. How few they must have been. How many millions didn't? I think about the families who were separated. A child on a transport to Coruscant for school. Parents back home. A husband on a business trip. A wife waiting. All of them going about their lives, making plans, assuming they'd see each other again. And then the transmission cuts. The holonet goes silent. And they know, or maybe they didn't know. Maybe they believe the reports. Maybe they read my words, rebel installation neutralized, and thought, well, thank the force my family wasn't involved in that. Maybe they tried to contact home and got nothing, and told themselves it was just a communications disruption. Maybe it took days for them to accept that everyone they loved was gone. And I imagine them trying to mourn. Trying to grieve. And everywhere they turn, they see the official story. Alderaan was a rebel base. Alderaan chose this. Alderaan's deaths are tragic, but necessary. Their grief becomes complicity. Their truth becomes a lie. I did that. I made it impossible for them to mourn honestly. That might be the worst thing I did. Not the killing, I didn't pull the trigger on the Death Star, but the erasing after. The making it so that even the survivors couldn't name what had been done to them. I'm too real. There were a few who tried. Rebel propagandists. Dissident journalists. Survivor testimonials. I wrote the responses to those too. I wrote the op-eds calling them liars. I wrote the intelligence reports linking them to rebel funding. I wrote the psychological profiles suggesting trauma-induced delusion. I systematically destroyed their credibility. I made it so that anyone who spoke the truth about Alderaan sounded like a conspiracy theorist, a fanatic, someone unhinged by grief. I was thorough. That was always my strength, Hatter honest. There was one case I remember specifically. A woman named Sarah Tolan. She'd been off-world when Alderaan was destroyed, visiting relatives on Chandrila. Her entire family was gone. Parents, siblings, husband, 2 children. Everyone. No. She started speaking at public gatherings, telling people what Alderaan had really been like. A peaceful world. No rebel base. No weapons. Just people. She became a problem. Not a major one, She didn't have much reach, but enough that ISB flagged her. The file landed on my desk with a note. Neutralize without creating martyr. I could have ignored it. I could have let her speak to her small audiences, let her grief exhaust itself naturally. But I didn't. I did my job. I fabricated evidence that she'd been dishonorably discharged from her public service during the Clone Wars for mental instability. I planted stories suggesting her family had disowned her years ago, that she was exploiting the tragedy for attention. I created a false medical record showing she'd been institutionalized for delusional disorder. Within 2 months, no one would give her a platform. Within 6, she'd disappeared from public view entirely. I don't know what happened to her. I never followed up. She was just another assignment, another problem solved, another voice silenced. I think about her sometimes. I wonder if she's still alive. I wonder if she still tries to tell people the truth, or if she gave up. I wonder if she knows that the reason no one believed Hira, the reason her own trauma became a weapon against Hira, was because of words I wrote in an afternoon and forgot about by evening. I wonder if she hates me. She should. I hate me, but hate requires knowing who to hate. She doesn't know I exist. None of them do. That's the genius of the system I served. The cruelty was impersonal. The lies were institutional. No one person could be held responsible because we were all responsible, which meant no one was. I've thought about finding her, confessing to her specifically, telling her, I'm the one who destroyed your credibility. I'm the one who made it impossible for you to honor your family's memory. I'm sorry, but I haven't. Because what good would it do? It wouldn't undo the damage. It'd just be another cruelty forcing her to confront the face of her oppressor, making her trauma about my guilt. So I do nothing. I live with it. Or, I try to. The thing about guilt is that it's supposed to lead somewhere. Remorse, repentance, redemption. There's supposed to be a narrative arc. You realize what you've done wrong. You change, you make amends, you become better. But what amends can I make? What change would be sufficient? How do you atone for helping to murder billions? You can't. That's the answer. There is no redemption for what I did. There's just the rest of my life, stretching ahead, empty and gray and meaningless. I'm 51 years old now. I'll probably live another 20, 30 years. Maybe more if the medical technology keeps improving. All those years, all those days, all those hours, and nothing I do with them will matter. Nothing will balance the scales. The galaxy will go on. Nani. The new republic will rise or fall. New governments will form. Anshui. New wars will start. And somewhere in the archives, my reports will sit, cataloged and preserved, a record of evil done efficiently. That's my legacy. That's all I'll leave behind. Sometimes I think about the people who write the histories now. The New Republic scholars, the academic researchers, the journalists trying to document what the Empire really was. They'll read my reports. They'll analyze my language. They'll write papers about propaganda techniques and authoritarian narrative control. They'll use me as an example. A case study. Evidence of systemic moral failure. And they'll be right. But they won't understand. Not really. Because they'll see it from the outside, from the safety of retrospect. They'll know how the story ends. They'll know the Empire fell, that it was evil, that it deserved to fall. But I didn't know that. Or I did, maybe, somewhere deep and unexamined. But I couldn't afford to know it, because knowing it would have meant confronting an impossible choice. Complicity or death. Everyone likes to think they'd choose death. They'd resist. They'd refuse. They'd be heroes. But most people aren't heroes. Most people are just trying to survive. And survival in the Empire meant compliance. It meant not asking questions. It meant doing your job, keeping your head down, telling yourself that you weren't really hurting anyone, that you were just a small part of something much larger, that your individual actions didn't matter. I told myself all of that, and I was wrong. My actions did matter. Every report I wrote mattered. Every lie I crafted mattered. Because lies compound. They build on each other. They create the atmosphere in which atrocity becomes possible. I didn't destroy Alderaan, but I helped create a galaxy where destroying Alderaan could be explained, justified, accepted. I helped build the infrastructure of denial that let people look away. That's what propaganda does. It doesn't just lie about what happened. It changes what's possible. It normalizes the unthinkable. It makes horror boring. And I was a master at it. There's a moment I keep returning to in my memory. It was maybe 6 years into my time in crisis response. I was still relatively young, late 20s, still learning the craft. I was working on a report about a slave labor camp on Kessel that had suffered a catastrophic oxygen recycler failure. 300 workers had suffocated over the course of several hours. The initial brief was clinical. Equipment malfunction, no sabotage suspected, productivity loss minimal, replacement workers already en route. I was supposed to write a statement for the Outer Rim Holonet feeds. Something brief. Acknowledge the incident, emphasize safety improvements, move on. But as I read the engineering report, really read, Itani realized the oxygen recycler hadn't malfunctioned. It had been turned off manually by the camp administrator, Nage or IAMS. As punishment for a work slowdown, he'd locked 300 beings in a sealed section of the mine and turned off their air, and then he'd waited for them to die. I sat with that information for a long time. I remember the light in the office saw cold and blue from the overhead panels. I remember the hum of the ventilation system, the irony of it, breathing recycled air while I wrote about people who'd been denied the same. I could have written the truth. The camp administrator was a monster. He should be tried for murder. The Empire should be held accountable for allowing someone like him to have power. Instead, I wrote, an equipment failure at a mining facility on Kessel resulted in unfortunate casualties. Imperial safety inspectors are reviewing protocols to prevent future incidents. The administrator in question has been reassigned pending investigation. The administrator was never punished. There was no investigation. He was transferred to a similar position on another world, where he likely did similar things, and my report made it sound like an accident. A tragedy, yes, but an accident. No one to blame. Just the cost of operating in dangerous environments. I remember finishing that report and feeling a strange calm, a settling, because I'd crossed a line and I'd survived it. I'd written something I knew was a lie, something that protected a murderer, something that made 300 deaths meaningless, and nothing happened. The sky didn't fall. My conscience didn't revolt. I just filed the report, got approval, went home, ate dinner, slept. That was the moment I became what I am. That was when I stopped being someone who wrote propaganda and became propaganda itself. There was no more distance between me and the lies. I was the lies. Everything after that was just repetition, refinement, mastery. I got better and better at finding the language that would make people accept the unacceptable. I learned to anticipate objections and preempt them. I learned to use emotional appeal, sympathy for Imperial soldiers, fear of rebel terrorism, pride in galactic unity to bypass rational analysis. I learned to create false equivalencies, to muddy clear moral waters, to make everything seem complicated and ambiguous and impossible to judge. I learned to weaponize uncertainty. To weaponize uncertainty. The best lies aren't simple fabrications. They're misdirections. They're true facts arranged to create false impressions. They're questions that cast doubt without making claims. Did Alderaanian officials have ties to known rebel leaders? That's not a lie. Some officials did. Senator Organa was openly sympathetic. But the phrasing suggests something sinister, something that justifies suspicion, when the truth was simply that Alderaan opposed tyranny. Were there military installations on Alderaan capable of producing weapons? Again, technically true. Alderaan had defensive capabilities, but the implication that those capabilities justified preemptive destruction monstrous. I was good at this. I was so good at this, and the Empire rewarded me for it. Promotions, commendations, increased access. I met Grand Moffs. I received personal approval messages from ESB directors. Once, I received a brief commendation signed by Grand Vizier Masameda himself, praising the exceptional clarity and effectiveness of my work on a particular crisis response. I kept that commendation in a drawer in my desk. I looked at it sometimes when I was working late, when I was tired, when I needed to remember that what I was doing mattered, that I was valued, that I was serving the Empire well. I burned it the night I left, watched it curl and blacken and turn to ash. But I can still see it in my mind, the Imperial seal, the formal language, my designation code rendered in precise, official script, proof that I was good at helping evil function efficiently. There were others like me, hundreds of us, probably thousands across the entire Imperial communications apparatus. I didn't know most of them. Our work was compartmentalized, but occasionally we'd overlap on major projects, coordinated campaigns that required multiple teams, multiple angles of approach. I remember working on the justification for Operation Cinder. If you don't know what that was, and most people don't, because we buried it well, it was Emperor Palpatine's contingency plan. If he died, certain Imperial commanders were ordered to destroy their own worlds, scorched Earth, burn the galaxy, rather than let it fall to the rebellion. It was insane. Even by Imperial standards, it was insane. Whole planets were to be bombed by their own defenders. Billions of loyal Imperial citizens incinerated for no strategic purpose except spite. When I first learned about it, I thought it was a mistake, a miscommunication. Surely the Emperor wouldn't order the destruction of his own empire. But it wasn't a mistake. The orders were clear. And my job, the team I worked with on, was to prepare the media response for after the first few worlds burn. We worked on it for 3 weeks. Brainstorming sessions. Draft after draft. We tried every angle. Rebel false flags. Necessary sacrifices to prevent rebel occupation. Now, cleansing of corruption. Nothing sounded convincing. How do you explain a government destroying its own people for no reason? Eventually, we settled on silence. No explanation. No acknowledgement. The worlds would burn, and we'd say nothing. We'd deny it happened. We'd call reports of it rebel propaganda. We'd create so much noise and confusion that no one would know what was true. It almost worked. After Endor, when some of the Operation Cinder protocols activated, when worlds like Vardos and Naboo came under attack from their own forces, Wei deployed the plan. Denial, Dashawayum, Nichang Jim Samurai, Niwamo Widi, captured, Random Gem Sao. Misdirection. Silence. But the Empire was collapsing too fast. The infrastructure we'd relied on, the holonet monopoly, the control of information flow, the network of loyal broadcasters, was fracturing. The truth leaked out. People learned what had happened. And for the first time in my career, my words failed. The lies didn't take hold. People rejected them. Not because the lies were poorly crafted, they weren't, but because the Empire's credibility was gone. Years of systematic deception had finally exhausted the public's willingness to believe. I should have felt vindicated. Some sense that there were limits, that truth could win, that lies couldn't triumph forever. Instead, I felt terrified, because if lies couldn't protect the Empire, what was left? Chaos, violence, noir, the very thing the Empire claimed to prevent. And I realized, maybe for the first time with complete clarity, that I'd never believed in the Empire's goodness. I'd believed in its power. I'd believed that a powerful lie was better than a weak truth. That order maintained through deception was better than chaos. But I'd been wrong. The Empire's power was built on lies. And when the lies failed, the power collapsed. There was nothing underneath. No foundation. No principle. Just the naked exercise of force increasingly desperate and pointless. I watched it fall. I was still writing reports as it happened. Osmoffs declared themselves warlords as sectors seceded as the new republic advanced. Each report more desperate than the last. The empire remained strong. Temporary setbacks. Regrouping for final victory. No one believed them. Genocide nowhere, including me. The clicking in my mind got louder. Click. Died. Click. Die. Day. Click. Die. Each keystroke felt hollow now. No. The words had no weight. They weren't shaping reality anymore. They were just sounds, empty and meaningless. I kept working anyway, because I didn't know what else to do. Because stopping would mean confronting what I'd become. Auction rate. The day I stopped, that day I mentioned earlier, when I couldn't write the report, it wasn't a choice. It was a failure. My mechanism for dissociation just broke. One. I looked at the assignment, and I couldn't make the translation anymore. I couldn't turn "we killed 300 civilians for no strategic reason" into security forces, neutralized a terrorist cell with minimal collateral damage. The gears had ground down. The machine was broken. My supervisor gave me medical leave. I think he knew I wasn't coming back. Maybe he'd seen it before. Maybe a lot of us broke eventually. Or maybe I'm special. Maybe most of them are still out there, still writing, still serving whatever remnant will have them, still believing, still functioning. I don't know which is worse. Man, I found work on Lotho Minora, a junk world in the Outer Rim, a place where the galaxy dumps what it doesn't want anymore. Seemed appropriate. I process shipping manifests for a salvage company. It's mindless work. Mine. Numbers and codes and routing information. Nothing that matters. Nothing that hurts anyone. I live in a prefab shelter near the processing facility. I eat reconstituted food from the commissary. I don't talk to my coworkers. I don't make friends. I exist, and that's all. Sometimes I think about the others, the people I worked with. I-7, 701741. I-7, 1742. I-7, 1744. Tar, no, nothing could than you. I never knew their real names. I wonder if they made it out. I wonder if they're haunted like I am, or if they found a way to live with it. I wonder if any of them think about me. Probably not. We weren't equal to each other. Oh, younger. We were functions. Units of production. Dalmayu. Interchangeable parts in the ministry's vast apparatus. That was the point. The Empire didn't want us to be people. People have consciences. People have limits. People might refuse. So they made us into something else. Processors. Transmitters. They gave us designation codes instead of names. They soundproofed our offices so we couldn't hear each other. They compartmentalized our work, so we never saw the full picture. They rewarded efficiency and punished hesitation. They turned us into machines, and we let them, because it was easier that way. Because being a machine meant not having to feel the weight of what we were doing. But I'm not a machine. I'm a person, and people remember. I remember the child on Gorman who was crushed under the landing strut of a Star Destroyer. I never saw her. I never knew her name, but I wrote the report that erased her death, that made it bureaucratic, acceptable, forgettable. I remember the Wookiees on Kashyyyk who burned in their forest homes. I never saw them. No. But I wrote the justification that made their genocide sound like a police action. I remember the beings on Alderaan, all 2 billion of them on, who died in an instant. I never saw them, but I wrote the narrative that made their deaths mean nothing. I remember all of them. The ones I erased, the ones I justified, the ones I helped the galaxy forget. They're with me now, always. In the clicking, in the silence, in the dreams I can't escape. That's my punishment. Not trial, not a prison. Just memory. Just the endless, inescapable knowledge of what I did. And the worst part, the part that makes it unbearable, that I can't even claim I was forced. I wasn't threatened. I wasn't coerced. I was offered a job. I took it. I did it well. I took pride in it. I chose this. Every day. Every report. Every lie. I chose it. There's a peculiar kind of torture in agency. Wah. If I'd been forced, if I'd been threatened with death or imprisonment, I could tell myself I was a victim. I could find some comfort in powerlessness. But I wasn't powerless. I had choices. And I chose wrong. Every single time. That's what I live with now. Not the lies themselves, they're part of history, immutable and done. But the choosing, the knowledge that I could have been different, and I wasn't. I could have been brave. I was a coward. I could have been honest. I was a liar. I could have resisted. I complied. And the galaxy burned a little brighter because of me. There's a bar in the settlement where I live. I go there sometimes. Not often. Just when the clicking gets too loud, when the silence in my shelter becomes suffocating. I sit in the corner. I drink cheap synthahol. I watch the other patrons, miners, salvagers, drifters. People who've come to Lotho Minor because they're running from something or they've got nowhere else to go. Sometimes I wonder about their stories. What they're running from. What they've done. Whether any of them carry the same kind of weight. I do. But I never ask. And they never ask me. We're all ghosts here. Living in the margins. Whoa. Waiting for some death. Redemption. Forgetting that probably won't come. One night, a few months ago, I heard 2 miners talking. They were younger, maybe mid-20s. Probably weren't even born when the Empire fell. They were arguing about history. One of them was saying the Empire wasn't all bad. That it brought order, stability, economic growth. That the New Republic propaganda exaggerates how bad it was. The other one was arguing back, saying the Empire committed genocide. Destroyed whole planets. Enslaved entire species. And the first one said, yeah, but most of that's probably rebel propaganda. You can't trust everything you hear. The real story is always more complicated. Now one day, I listened to them argue for maybe 20 minutes. Back and forth. Neither one changing the other's mind. Just talking past each other, each certain in their own version of history. And I realized I'm still winning. Even now. Even after the Empire fell. Even after the truth supposedly came out. The doubt I created, the uncertainty, the both sides complexity, it's still there. It's still working. People still can't agree on basic facts because I made facts irrelevant. I made everything arguable. I made history itself a contested space where nothing can be definitively known. That's my legacy. Not the specific lies, but the infrastructure of lying. The sense that truth is always suspect, that everyone has an agenda, that nothing can be trusted. I wanted to interrupt them. I wanted to tell the first miner, yes, it was that bad. Worse, actually. I know because I helped cover it up. I made it seem complicated when it was actually very simple. The Empire was evil, and it killed billions, and the only complexity was how many people like me helped it do that. But I didn't say anything. I just finished my drink and left. Because what good would it do? He wouldn't believe me. He'd think I was just another crazy old person with a story. Or he'd think I was rebel propaganda made flesh. Or he'd believe me, and then what? What would change? Nothing. That's what. Well, the dead would still be dead. The lies would still be lies. The galaxy would keep spinning, keep arguing, keep forgetting. I walk back to my shelter through the junk fields of Lotho Minor. Mountains of wreckage surround Mia. Broken ships, discarded machinery, the detritus of 1,000 worlds. The galaxy's garbage, piled high and rusting under alien stars. This is where I belong. Among the waste. Among the things that served their purpose and were thrown away. Except I wasn't thrown away. I left. I walked away from my post, from my duty, from the only thing I was ever good at. Was that courage? Or just exhaustion? I don't know. I don't think it matters. What matters is that I stopped. Too late. Or too late. After decades of damage. But I stopped. It's not redemption. It's not even repentance. It's just stopping. And now I'm here, in the garbage, trying to figure out how to live with what I am. Some days I think I should confess. Publicly. Find a new Republic court. Testify about what I did. Accept whatever punishment they give me. At least then, the truth would be on record. At least some of the people I helped silence would have their stories acknowledged. But I'm a coward. I've always been a coward. And I can't face that. Can't face standing in a courtroom while they read my reports, while survivors testify about the damage my words caused, while the galaxy finally sees the face behind designation, I-701743. So, I hide. I work my meaningless job. Wide to equalize. I live my meaningless life. I wait for death. And I remember. That's all I can do now. Remember. Hold the weight of it. Not let myself forget or rationalize or slip back into the comfortable lies I used to believe. The Empire told me truth was treason. And I believed it. I enforced it. I made it real. But the Empire was wrong. Truth isn't treason. Truth is just truth. And now, and Lisa, no matter how well crafted, no matter how necessary they seem, air still lies. I learned that too late. But I learned it, for whatever that's worth. The clicking is quieter now. Some days, I barely hear it. Other days, it's deafening. I don't think it will ever truly stop. It's part of me now. The sound of my own hands, typing the words that killed the worlds. I'm 51 years old. I'll probably live another 30 years. Maybe 40 if I'm unlucky. All those years stretching ahead. Empty. Meow. Heavy. Haunted. Sometimes I think about the child on Gorman. Me, the one crushed under the Star Destroyer. I imagine she had a name, a family, friends, dreams, a whole life that was just beginning. She, and then it ended, suddenly, violently, meaninglessly. And I wrote the report that made sure no one would remember her. That made her death a statistic, an abstraction. Nothing. Nothing. I'm sorry. I know it doesn't matter. I know it doesn't help. I know sorry is the emptiest word in the galaxy when it comes decades too late and changes nothing. But I'm sorry. To her. Lord, what issue? To all of them. To every person whose death I made acceptable, whose suffering I made invisible, whose truth I erased. I'm sorry. And I'll keep being sorry every day for the rest of my life. It won't bring them back. It won't undo what I did. It won't balance anything. But it's all I have left. The truth. Don't you? Too late. Spoken into the void by a ghost. No one knows, and no one will remember. Truth is treason, the Empire said. But the Empire is gone. And I'm still here. Remembering? Wow. Click dot. Click. Doll. Click. Die.